Imagine yourself sitting on warm sand. The sun hasn't climbed too high yet. The air is fresh, calm. The waves roll in lazily, and with each one, your body seems to sink deeper into relaxation. Around you there's quiet, interrupted only by the distant sound of laughter and the occasional cry of a seagull. This morning feels clean, transparent, like it was painted in watercolor. The kind of morning you only find by the sea. Your eyes drift toward the water. Not far from the shore, someone is swimming. A man you don't know who he is. Maybe a tourist, maybe a local. Just someone who decided to begin the day in the ocean. He moves with ease, effortlessly. Like he's become a part of the water itself. You can tell he's at peace. He's not rushing, not fighting the current. He's simply existing in the moment, as if the rest of the world has fallen away beyond the horizon. You keep watching him without meaning to. Your eyes are just drawn to him, to that lone figure moving across the surface. Everything around still feels safe. The sea is calm, the sunlight is gentle, and the people on the beach barely move. It all look so right, so harmonious, like nothing bad could possibly happen in a place like this. And then something shifts almost imperceptibly. You don't even realize at first what's changed, but a feeling rises in you as if the tone of the world has gone quiet. Just slightly darker. The man in the water makes an odd movement, sharp and unnatural, like something tugged him. For a moment he lifts one arm, not waving, not calling out, just a gesture that doesn't quite make sense. He disappears beneath the surface and comes up again, but now you can't look away. Something's wrong. You squint. The water near him has lost its crystal clarity. A color appears, rusty dark red, faint at first, then more defined. And then you understand it's blood. You stand up, you try to process what you're seeing. Others around you are beginning to notice too, but still you are one of the first to see the distinct, dark silhouette just a few meters from the swimmer. It breaks the surface for a fraction of a second, then vanishes as if it was never there. People start to stir, some rise. Some shout. The beach that was moments ago serene is now a scene of alarm. But you're still watching the water because you can't look away. The man is no longer moving. The waves gently rock his body, and you already know this isn't exhaustion. This is the end. It all happened almost silently. No struggle, no warning. You're standing there and the sun continues to rise, bathing the morning in golden light, just as it did before. Only now you understand that beneath all this beauty, there can be something hidden, something with no mercy, no intent, and no guilt. You've become a witness, and this moment will stay with you for a long time. Sharks have long been a part of human fear, but this is a very particular kind of fear. Not the kind that flares up and disappears, but something deeper, more rooted in collective consciousness. It feeds on images, legends, movies, and half-told stories that pass from one person to another, from one generation to the next. And yet most of these ideas have little to do with reality. Let's start with the most persistent myth, that a shark is a killing machine. A predator that doesn't think, doesn't feel, but simply hunts and devours. Crude, aggressive, mindless, driven only by hunger and blood. This image has been firmly planted in our minds through culture, and more than anything else, through cinema. The movie Jaws, released in 1975, changed the way people saw sharks forever. Before it, a shark was just another sea creature, rare, mysterious, barely understood. Afterward, it became a symbol of terror. Silent, massive, unstoppable. In the film, the shark doesn't just attack. It hunts, stalks, returns. And although it's a work of fiction, that image began to be accepted as fact. After Jaws, the number of people claiming to be afraid of sharks rose dramatically. Pointless exterminations began. People killed sharks indiscriminately out of fear, out of hatred, out of a desire to protect themselves. The killings weren't a response to attacks, they were reactions to the idea of the shark itself. And the more these stories spread, The deeper the conviction grew, sharks are enemies. Another myth tells us that sharks attack people deliberately, as if humans are chosen targets prey. This belief is fueled by news reports that describe every incident as a shark attack on a person, not as what it most often is, a rare and mostly accidental event. In truth, humans are not part of a shark's natural diet. Our meat is too bony, lacking in fat and nutrients. It simply doesn't suit what sharks instinctively hunt in the wild. Most attacks don't happen because a shark wants to eat a human. They happen because the shark makes a mistake. Many species of sharks rely on movement, silhouette and scent to detect prey. In murky water, especially with poor visibility, a swimmer or surfer might resemble a seal or an injured fish. Sometimes a shark takes a single bite, testing, trying to understand what it's dealing with. But once it tastes human flesh, it almost always swims away. To a shark, a human is unfamiliar and unappealing. Unfortunately, that single bite is often enough to cause devastating harm. Then there's the infamous belief that if a shark smells even a drop of blood, it will go into a frenzy, a mindless, unstoppable rage. That's another exaggeration. It's true that a shark's sense of smell is incredibly acute. It can detect minute concentrations of blood from dozens of meters away. But that doesn't mean it immediately attacks sharks. Aren't driven purely by scent. They assess, they observe, and more often than not, they move on. Another common myth is that all sharks are equally dangerous. In popular imagination, they've been reduced to one uniform creature, large, scary, bloodthirsty. But there are hundreds of species of sharks. Most have never attacked a human. Some feed on plankton. Others exclusively eat small fish. Only a handful are even potentially dangerous, and among those attacks are extremely rare. And finally, one of the most persistent and cinematic myths: that sharks can hold a grudge, that they return track and finish what they started. This idea is especially resilient thanks to films. But in reality, sharks do not behave this way. They are not social predators. They have no concept of revenge or pursuit. Everything they do is driven by basic instinct: to move, to survive, to feed. These myths about sharks persist because they're simple. They offer clear answers, feed familiar fears, and reinforce what people already feel. But the more we learn about sharks, the clearer it becomes reality is far more complex than Hollywood. And in that reality, sharks are not bloodthirsty monsters. They are ancient creatures that simply aren't like us. And what we don't understand, we almost always fear. A shark's sensory system functions according to principles that are entirely different from our own. It does not look for prey in the way a land predator might. Its perception is based on a network of complex receptors spread across its body, especially concentrated around the head and snout. Sharks do possess vision adapted to the dim, shifting light of their environment, but their color perception is limited, and their reliance is more on light contrast and movement than detail. What appears to us as the clear, recognizable figure of a swimmer, a person on their back, or a surfer lying on a board registers for a shark as a silhouette, a shadow against the shimmering surface. That shape can only resemble something the shark already knows, a seal, for example, or an injured animal, something that signals potential prey. But vision is only one part of the picture. The shark's understanding of its environment comes from a layered system of sensory input dominated by smell and the detection of electromagnetic fields. Its sense of smell is extraordinarily sensitive, capable of detecting trace elements in enormous volumes of water, but scent alone does not trigger action. It must be supported by other indicators. Around its snout, a shark has what are known as the ampullae of Lorenzini, specialized sensory organs that detect the faintest electrical signals emitted by living beings. Every muscle contraction, every heartbeat, even the smallest twitch of movement creates a signal that the shark can hear through this system. For the shark, this is a kind of map of life in the water, one that it navigates constantly and instinctively. When a human enters the ocean, their body begins to transmit signals that often unknowingly mimic those of vulnerable animals. Irregular movement, splashing, rapid breathing, and poor coordination can suggest to the shark something it has encountered many times before: a wounded fish, a fatigued seal, a struggling source of food. The shark does not always approach with the intent to attack. Often it approaches to identify, and its primary method of identification is physical. A bite from a shark is not necessarily the start of a hunt in many cases. It is a test, a biological sampling. In the wild, sharks often test objects to determine whether they are edible or worth pursuing. If the object proves unpalatable, too bony, too dense, too foreign in texture, the shark loses interest and departs. This is precisely what happens in the vast majority of shark-human encounters. The incident does not continue because the human is not a suitable food source. The shark does not come back. It does not pursue, it does not finish what it started. It simply disappears into the deep, leaving behind a wounded body and a lasting shock. Water is not our domain, and no matter how skilled we believe we are, no matter how calm we try to remain, or how well we think we understand the rules in the ocean, we are still outsiders. We lack the language of marine life. And the shark lacks the language to understand us. It is in that mutual incomprehension that the real danger lies. Among the hundreds of shark species that inhabit the world's oceans, only a few have ever attacked a human being. Even fewer are genuinely dangerous. Not because they seek humans out, but because their size, habitat, and methods of hunting occasionally bring them in contact with people. These encounters are rare, but when they occur, the consequences can be devastating. That is why when we speak of dangerous sharks, we are not talking about evil or malice, but about a natural threat, one that deserves to be understood and respected. The first name on this list is almost always the great white shark, a species surrounded by legend, fear, and misunderstanding, particularly after the release of a now iconic film that shaped public perception. But the truth is far more complex. The great white is not a mindless killer, but a highly evolved marine predator, capable of making decisions and adapting its behavior to a given situation. It can grow over 6 meters in length and weigh nearly a ton, with an extraordinary sense of smell, lightning reflexes, and a hunting strategy based on swift upward ambushes. Encounters with great whites most often occur in areas populated by seals and sea lions, their natural prey, yet a human in the water nearby, based on shape and movement alone, can easily be mistaken for such an animal. The great white does not feed on humans, but the sheer force of a single investigatory bite is often enough to prove fatal. Second in terms of danger is the tiger shark, sometimes called the garbage bin of the sea, not for its behavior, but for its remarkable lack of dietary selectivity. Items found in the stomachs of tiger sharks include car license plates, shoes, animal bones, plastic debris, and unfortunately, human remains. Tiger sharks are often found in warm coastal waters, the same areas where tourists swim, dive, and surf. Unlike the great white, the tiger shark is more likely to consume what it bites. This makes its behavior less predictable and potentially more dangerous. It may approach a human not just out of curiosity, but with an intent to feed. If the signals it receives seem convincing, the bite of a tiger shark is powerful and deep, and if the target continues to move, repeated strikes may follow. The third and perhaps most underestimated yet dangerous is the bull shark. What makes this species particularly threatening is its ability to survive in both saltwater and freshwater. Bull sharks have been known to swim into river mouths, estuaries, and even lakes. This means they often show up where they are least expected. Places where children wade, where fishermen stand knee-deep, where no one imagines a large predator could appear. Bull sharks are aggressive, powerfully built with short, wide snouts and exceptionally strong jaws. Many non-fatal but severe attacks have been traced back to bull sharks, especially in regions like Central and South America. And Southeast Asia. Fourth is the mako shark. The fastest of all shark species, capable of reaching speeds up to 70 kilometers per hour. The mako is also incredibly strong and agile. Although encounters with humans are rare, mostly due to its preference for deep open waters. When they do occur, especially during fishing or diving, the results can be serious. Like many pelagic predators, the mako reacts to splashing movement and sound. It strikes fast and under certain conditions. May even attack a boat if it perceives a threat or a potential meal. However, more often than not, the mako avoids human interaction altogether. And finally, there is the oceanic white tip shark, a species discussed less frequently than the others, but historically considered responsible for the greatest number of fatalities. In shipwreck scenarios, unlike most coastal sharks, the white tip prefers the vast openness of the deep sea. It can travel long distances along migratory routes, and is often the first to arrive in areas where ships or planes have gone down, usually cautious. The oceanic white tip undergoes a dramatic behavioral shift when faced with the presence of blood, debris, and numerous struggling bodies in the water. In such situations, it becomes assertive, persistent, and at times may attack in groups. Some of the worst maritime disasters of the 20th century, particularly during World War II, are believed to have involved this species in multiple fatal incidents over extended periods. These 5 species are not monsters. They are apex predators living according to a logic and instinct that has been shaped over millions of years. They do not hunt humans deliberately, do not make plans, and do not operate with any moral awareness. They simply do what they have always done. They react, investigate, hunt. The danger arises not because they are looking for us, but because we are increasingly present in their world. And if we want to prevent future tragedies, our role is not to destroy, but to understand, not to fear, but to respect, because each of these species is a vital part of a greater ecosystem, one in which we are and always will be temporary guests. When the subject of shark attacks arises, the conversation usually begins with numbers, percentages, statistical likelihood, and calculated risks that assure us how exceedingly rare such incidents are. In the context of everyday life, and all of this is true, compared to the vast range of dangers humans face, both in water and on land, the threat of a shark attack is almost negligible. But these numbers lose their meaning the moment we hear the voice of someone who has lived through such an encounter, someone who was pulled out of that statistical margin and forced to face a predator, not as an abstract idea, but as a living reality. One that left behind scars deeper than what any chart could capture. These stories resist simplification. They can't be reduced to bullet points or neat conclusions. Each one is a complete narrative, complex, tense, shaped by the convergence of instinct, fear, luck, and often a split-second reaction that made all the difference. They are not just accounts of survival. They are windows into a moment when the human world and the wild world collided, if only for a breath. One of the most well-known cases is that of Rodney Fox, an Australian spearfisher who in the early 1960s was competing in a championship off the southern coast of the country. At one point during the dive, he felt a sudden forceful impact against his side, so strong and abrupt that he initially believed he had collided with a boat or a submerged object. It wasn't until he was pulled downward, his torso clenched in the jaws of something immense, that he understood it was a shark. What followed, as he later described, was a moment stripped of time and language, a place of silence, pain, and the primal desperation to reach the surface, to breathe, to survive. Somehow he managed to break free and return to the surface. Where he was rescued, his injuries were severe. Punctured lungs, torn muscles, and a damaged spine. And surgeons would ultimately apply over 400 stitches to close the wounds. Remarkably, Fox not only recovered, but eventually returned to the ocean, becoming one of the first people to film and study great white sharks outside of protective cages. He would later say that he did not hate the creature that had nearly taken his life, because it had simply done what it was built to do. Another widely known story is that of Bethany Hamilton, a teenage surfer from Hawaii who in 2003, at just 13 years old, went out early one morning to train. The conditions were calm, the sky clear, the water smooth. She was floating on her board a short distance from the shore, when a shadow rose from beneath, and in a single decisive movement, a tiger shark severed her arm above the elbow. The blood loss was so extreme that survival seemed nearly impossible. Yet she did survive thanks to the quick actions of those around, her timely medical care, and an extraordinary force of will that would later define her public life. She returned to competitive surfing within a year, wrote a memoir, and even portrayed herself in the film adaptation of her story. Her voice, steady and unembellished, has since inspired countless others, not just as an athlete, but as someone who faced what most fear and continued forward. There are many more stories, some less documented, some less visible to the world, but no less meaningful in each of them. The same elements return. A human being enters a world they do not control, encounters a creature that does not speak their language, and against odds emerges with their life, and often with a completely transformed understanding of it. Sometimes it's instinct that helps, the ability to stay calm, to strike the shark in a sensitive area, to deter it just long enough to escape. Sometimes it's luck, the nearness of a boat, the presence of a friend, or a piece of equipment that made the difference. More often, it is a convergence of all these things. Reaction chance and the unpredictable mechanics have an environment that does not care for human plans. What is perhaps most striking is how rarely survivors express hatred toward the shark. Almost all speak of fear of pain, of the profound shock, but also of awe. They do not frame their stories in terms of revenge or blame. Instead, they often speak of respect for the animal's power, for the unknown logic of nature, and for the encounter itself. They don't view what happened as a targeted act, but as a crossing of paths, an accident of time and place, where two trajectories overlapped for a single moment, with irreversible consequence. These stories are not told to deepen our fear of sharks. They are not warnings against their nature. Rather, they serve as reminders that the ocean is not our domain. And when we enter it, we do so with both its beauty and its danger. To be in the sea is to step into a world with different rules, shaped by different senses, inhabited by lives that do not revolve around us. And sometimes those lives remind us sharply and without warning of just how foreign we truly are in their realm. Part 6: Why shark attacks are increasing. When shark attacks occur in different parts of the world, within a short span of time, public attention turns toward the ocean. Almost instantly, news headlines grow louder, more urgent and often more sensational. People begin asking questions. Has it become more dangerous? Has something changed? Why does this seem to be happening more often than before? And while every incident deserves its own analysis, there is indeed a general trend. The number of human-shark encounters is increasing. But this does not mean that sharks are becoming more aggressive or more fearless. The reasons lie much deeper. And in most cases, the explanation is found not in the shark's behavior, but in the changes affecting human activity and the environment that surrounds both species. The first and perhaps most obvious factor is the sheer increase in the number of people entering the water. In recent decades, coastal tourism has grown exponentially. Millions of people vacation each year in regions that were once remote, undeveloped or entirely untouched. Beaches that formerly served as quiet, natural breeding grounds for marine life, have become hubs of recreation, water sports, diving and surfing. The more people step into the ocean, the higher the probability that someone at some point will occupy the same space at the same time as a hunting shark. It is not a question of increased aggression, but of density of overlapping paths between two species in motion. The second major factor is climate change, which directly affects ocean temperatures, and as a result, the migratory patterns of countless marine species, including sharks as water temperatures rise. Many species are pushed toward new zones, some farther north, others closer to shore. Areas that once hosted cool, temperate waters are now becoming favorable habitats for warm water predators. This shift has brought sharks into regions where they were previously rare or absent: new beaches, river mouths, coastal bays, places where people are accustomed to feeling safe. These new zones of overlap are not the result of targeted movement, but of adaptation of necessity. Humans arrive seeking rest and leisure. Sharks arrive searching for food, and neither anticipates the other's presence. A third factor is the depletion of natural prey. Overfishing, coral reef degradation, and pollution have disrupted the food chains upon which sharks rely. In a habitat where the usual sources of nourishment are declining, a shark may begin to investigate alternative options. Not out of preference, but out of instinct. This does not mean sharks are turning on humans as a deliberate food source. It means they are experimenting, exploring, and occasionally misidentifying what they encounter. We must also consider the role of modern technology in amplifying perception today. We have more cameras, drones, data-sharing platforms, and eyewitnesses than ever before. Incidents that once would have remained isolated, local tragedies now become global news within minutes. This increased visibility creates a powerful impression of rising danger, even when some of that increase is simply the result of better documentation. Finally, we must take into account the evolving behavior of humans in the water. People swim farther from shore, ignore warning signs, enter the ocean at dusk or during the night when visibility is poor, and the chance of misidentification by a shark increases. Activities such as surfing, spearfishing, and free diving also elevate the risk of being perceived as vulnerable or as potential prey, so the rise in shark attacks is not a signal of nature rebelling, nor is it proof that sharks have begun to hunt humans with new intent. Rather, it is the outcome of overlapping forces: urban expansion along coastlines, shifting ecosystems, changing ocean temperatures, and the growing presence of people in habitats where wildlife once moved freely and without interruption. Sharks have not changed, the world around them has. And as a result, we are meeting each other more often in places where not so long ago we used to live entirely apart. Part 7: How to avoid a shark attack. No matter how warm, clear, or inviting the sea may appear, it remains a natural environment in which the human being is not the master, but the guest. It is a space governed by rules and instincts, different from those that shape life on land, and therefore entering the water, especially in areas where sharks are known to inhabit, requires more than just the ability to swim or balance on a board. It requires an understanding of how your presence might be perceived by a creature that does not recognize you as human, but instead sees a moving form, a disturbance, perhaps something resembling prey. It is not possible to completely eliminate the risk of encountering a shark if you were swimming in its habitat, but the likelihood of such an encounter can be reduced, not through weapons, loud noises, or technological devices, but through calm, deliberate behavior that does not trigger curiosity, does not send the wrong signals, and does not mimic the movements of something vulnerable or edible. First and foremost, it is important to understand when and where the risk of encountering a shark increases. The majority of recorded attacks occur in shallow coastal waters, especially during dawn and dusk, when visibility is reduced and the interplay of light and shadow distorts shapes, These are hours when many predators, including sharks, are naturally more active. Add to this murky water wave agitation and mixed organic scents, and the chances of being mistaken for natural prey become significantly higher. The simplest and most effective action is to avoid swimming far from shore alone, particularly in unfamiliar or sparsely populated areas. Being in a group dramatically lowers the likelihood of attack, as sharks, in most cases, are less inclined to approach clustered activity. A lone swimmer or surfer appears isolated and more accessible, while a person surrounded by others becomes part of a larger, more complex structure. Equally important is to avoid erratic or panic movements, splashing, flailing, or abrupt changes in direction can resemble the behavior of a wounded fish, which in the shark sensory world can trigger interest or even an investigatory approach. A smooth, calm and purposeful movement is less likely to attract attention. A shark does not attack because it recognizes you as a human. It reacts when your shape or behavior fits a pattern it instinctively associates with prey. Another important consideration is blood and bodily scent. Even minor cuts can release organic material into the water that sharks are capable of detecting from impressive distances. For this reason, individuals with open wounds, women during menstruation, or children with recent scrapes should be particularly cautious. In any case of active bleeding, it is advisable to avoid entering open water altogether. It is also wise to avoid wearing shiny jewelry, especially in bright sunlight. Watches, bracelets, necklaces or rings can reflect light in a way that mimics the flash of fish scales, which can attract a shark's attention, particularly in clearer waters. And perhaps most importantly, one must pay attention to local guidance. Beach warning flags, lifeguard instructions, posted signs and public alerts should not be dismissed. If a red or black flag is raised, if sirens sound, or if sharks have been sighted in recent days, the ocean should be respected, not tested. Nature does not differentiate between confidence and caution. It does not reward experience or intuition. In the unlikely event that you do encounter a shark, the most crucial thing is not to panic and not to flee. Sudden movement, especially away from the shark, is provocative. Experts advise turning to face the animal, maintaining eye contact if possible, minimizing abrupt gestures, and if the shark comes too close, using any object available, such as a fin board or camera, to create a physical barrier. Sharks are not machines, they assess. In many cases, a defensive posture. Even a gentle push can signal that you are not suitable prey. None of this offers absolute protection, but it does provide understanding and approach built not on fear, but on respect, awareness, and shared presence. The sea is not hostile, it is simply not ours. And the more we move through it as though we belong calmly, attentively, without disruption, the more likely it is that the other inhabitants of this world will let us pass untouched. Part 8. Do sharks kill humans on purpose? When a human comes face to face with a predator, especially one that cannot be reasoned with or understood through familiar logic, there is a natural tendency to impose meaning upon the encounter, to find structure in the chaos, to imagine intent where there may be none. We are conditioned to seek agency behind harm. If pain has occurred, someone must have caused it. If there is a victim, there must also be a perpetrator. And so when a shark is involved in a fatal incident, it is almost instinctively cast in the role of aggressor, something that chose, something that acted, something that kills. But the question of whether sharks kill humans on purpose is far more complex than it might appear, because to even approach an answer, we must first ask what it means to act on purpose, and whether this concept holds any relevance for a creature whose behavior is not governed by human emotion. morality, or conscious intention, sharks do not possess a cognitive model that includes the desire to harm people. They do not hunt humans, they do not single them out, and they do not operate according to strategies designed to kill, for pleasure or control. In fact, humans are not part of the shark's natural food chain at all. Our anatomy, composition, and movement patterns make us highly inefficient as prey. And in the vast majority of recorded attacks, the event does not end with consumption. Often the shark bites once and retreats. Sometimes it circles, investigates, and leaves without further engagement. These moments are not acts of malice. They are errors of perception, misreadings of signals that for a fleeting moment resemble something familiar, in murky water under broken light or shifting currents. The shape of a swimmer or a surfer may trigger recognition in a shark's sensory system, something that mimics the silhouette of a seal or the vibrations of a struggling fish. The shark responds not because it knows who or what you are, but because the combination of movement, contrast, and electrical signals suggests the possibility of prey. The initial bite is not an execution. It is an inquiry. It is an evolutionary mechanism designed to gather information, to identify what the shark is encountering. More often than not, once the shark realizes the mistake, it disengages. The tragedy is that even a single bite can be catastrophic for a human being. And this is where the rupture between two worlds becomes most profound. One species acts without intent. The other suffers with meaning. The human mind struggles to process events that have no will behind them. We are unnerved by forces that are indifferent, by violence without anger, by death without enmity. It is not the size of the shark or the strength of its bite that terrifies us most. It is the absence of anything we can call motive. And so when people ask whether sharks kill humans intentionally, the answer is no, not in any sense that aligns with our understanding of purpose. The shark does not assign roles. It does not recognize the other in the human being. It does not seek revenge, territory, or dominance. It responds to stimuli as it always has, using instincts shaped by deep time, without knowing or needing to know what we are. To the shark, a human in the water is not a person. It is a moving signal, a shape within the current, a vibration to be tested, and when the test fails, when the mistake becomes clear, the shark disappears. But for the human, the consequences remain in the body, in the memory, in the culture, in the fear that lingers. This understanding does not undo the suffering. It does not bring back those who were lost, but it does return scale and proportion to the event. It reminds us that this is not a moral failure of the natural world, not a calculated threat, not a monster lurking with intent. It is the collision of two systems that do not speak the same language, one that enters a space it does not fully comprehend, and another that acts without awareness of the damage it can cause. We fear sharks not because they are evil, but because they are utterly unlike us, and in that otherness lies the deepest discomfort, but also the beginning of respect. When we stop projecting our emotions onto nature, when we release the need to see monsters where there are only creatures of instinct, we begin to encounter the ocean and the shark not as enemies, but as realities. The shark does not kill humans on purpose. It lives, it reacts, it survives bound to a logic far older than our own. And if we wish to enter its world, we must do so with the humility to know that not everything can be controlled, not everything can be explained in our terms, and not everything needs to fear us or be feared in return, because understanding begins where certainty ends.